This video is all about the Tux CM. Now, for those who don't know, the Tux Balisong project is an open source Balisong platform that allows anybody to go ahead and download the files for and either modify the existing files and manufacture their own Balisong that way, or you can even take some of the base files and manufacture them as is and put together your very own Balisong in the easiest way possible without compromising serious sought after features. This particular model is the Tux CM, like I mentioned. CM stands for channel model, and the reason for that is because it is a channel handle construction Balisong. In this case, it is a trainer. So we have the metal liner reinforced composite handles. So in this case, the plastic is a glass-filled nylon material, which is very durable, but also pretty cheap. And then it has titanium liners running along the inside of that channel for durability and tolerance reasons. You'll notice down here we have this funny looking spacer that is a hot swappable spacer, meaning you are able to remove that spacer without having to disassemble the entire knife. So I'll demonstrate all of that stuff later. We have hidden Zen pins, and we have tunable pivots to replace bushings. So for those who are familiar, bushings are probably the most sought after Balisong pivot system. However, they are a pain in the ass to tune. They take a lot of knowledge, they take a lot of preparation, a lot of experience, and a lot of time. So it costs a lot more to implement bushings into a Balisong design compared to washers or bearings. However, in order to make the assembly process for the end user much simpler, as well as taking costs down from the kits that I have available on my website, I opted to use these tunable pivots, also known as no Loctite pivots, to allow this washer-driven knife have tighter tolerances and screws that are able to be tightened down a lot more compared to a conventional washer-driven knife. So, not perfect tolerances, but you got good sound, and the screws won't back out on you very easily. Kind of like a well-tuned bushing knife like my Sentinel here. So the purpose of this video is to go over the individual highlight features of the Tux CM, as well as go over some general maintenance and precautions when assembling and disassembling, because this is a different handle construction Balisong. This whole knife is very experimental, and I just want to make sure that anybody out there who either builds one on their own or purchases one from me, you don't do something that messes up your build. So that is what I'm going to go over for the remainder of the video. So the first thing I want to go over is the tunable pivots, because I'm sure most people are not aware of them. This is not an original design, by the way, but I did implement this into the design because it's a fantastic idea. So here you have the tunable pivot, and the way that I'm going to show how these work is you'll notice how the screw is completely seated against the bolt. It goes all the way down, and you're able to unscrew it, and it'll come back out, right? Just a normal sex bolt and a screw. Screw that back on. Actually, we're going to leave it hanging off the edge a little bit. If we look at the back side of the pivot, you'll see that there's a little grub screw here. It comes out the back. And what you do is you use a 1/16 inch Allen key, I believe. And you're going to go ahead and set that grub screw down into that pivot. It's not focusing. Bear with me. And you're just going to keep turning it until it doesn't want to go any further. So you'll notice the grub screw is now seated deep inside of the sex bolt here. And if I go and I try to tighten the screw, watch what happens. See, it twists freely and it stops. And the reason why it stops like that is because the screw is now hitting against the bottom of that grub screw, which prevents the screw from traveling any further. So if we go ahead and unscrew this, and we get that grub screw back up to the surface here, see, there's the grub screw, and now the screw can seat itself further into the sex bolt. So that is how these tunable pivots work, and the significance behind it, it achieves a few things. For one, it acts as a precautionary measure when tightening the screws against this plastic shell. Now, the glass-filled nylon is very durable. I've dropped this particular build on tile and concrete and cement floors and stuff, and there's no cracking or anything. As you see, it is how it is. It's still fully functional and it looks pretty damn good for plastic. However, I just wanted to be sure that if you were to full crank these screws, it wasn't going to go ahead and crack this pivot area, because it is a lot more fragile compared to some of the other areas of the handle. So as long as you tune it correctly and you set that grub screw to a point where you get a good swing on the handles, but it's not too tight to where you're putting too much pressure on that pivot area on the shells, it's going to just act as a layer of safety to prevent that from happening. So just understand that's one reason. The second one, like I mentioned, is to actually get a better consistent tune on it's not going to focus, on a washer-driven, come on, focus, washer-driven knife. So you can kind of see how that works here. Again, it's a way to substitute bushings, and it's a lot cheaper and easier for the end consumer, being you guys, to assemble it if you were doing this from scratch, or to maintain it if you were to just purchase one from me, for example. So that is how the tunable pivots work. Now we'll move on to the next thing, which would be the hot swappable spacers. So the hot swappable spacers, the way that these work is I like to back off the screw here just a little bit, and you'll notice you have this little channel, little hole here where the spacer, or where this Torx driver can sit in the spacer, and you can pull it up. You want to make sure that you don't press against the bottom of the channel shell here. You just want to pull it up a little bit so that the spacer comes up. And then what you could do is go in from behind here and just kick it all the way out. And then you'll see you have your spacer coming up, excuse me. And you can then slide it away from the sex bolt on the bottom and pull it out. So I'll just show you what the spacer looks like real quick. So you have this weird looking hook shape for the spacer. And the way that it works is when you insert it into the channel here and you push it, it's going to hook onto that sex bolt, and then it pivots around it on the inside to the point where that hook can now no longer go left to right, and it can't go up and down. It kind of locks itself into place, and the only way to undo it is to fully rotate it, and then unhook it like I just demonstrated. So to reinsert it, what you do is you slide it forward. So you go here, slide it forward all the way. I like to just take the Tux driver and just make sure it's all the way forward. And then you want to push down and then towards the tip of the Balisong until it starts to rotate. If it snags, don't force it. You'll probably break the spacer. And then it should sit just like that. And then you just take your finger here or the Tux driver, just make sure it's all the way against the back wall of that channel. And to keep it in place, you just tighten that bottom screw. And then that keeps it seated. So that is how the hot swappable spacers work. Pretty neat little feature. You could go ahead and make these out of different materials. You can make them out of titanium, stainless steel, whatever. You can also go ahead and modify the hot swappable spacers if you decide to download the files. And you can also add little holes for pin weights and just use the plastic spacer with some pin weights if you want to adjust the balance and stuff. Or like I said, you can go ahead and just make this whole spacer in any other material. But that is how that works. So I went ahead and removed one of the handles from my personal Tux CM build so I can show you how to assemble the handle, because this is a new handle style construction and I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page and we know how to navigate the platform. So the first thing I'm going to do here is actually remove the spacer from there, and then I'm going to pop out the bottom pivot. So remove the spacer and then pop out the pivot. And you'll see here I have the washers and stuff seated. I'll try to work around that. So at this point you have the channel shell and the liners, and if you go up here to the fork, you kind of push back on them a little bit, you'll see that the liners want to pop out. And I just want to show you one thing here that's pretty important. So you'll notice here on the liner, instead of a circle cut, we have an oval cut. And the reason why there's an oval cut here as opposed to a circle cut is to allow for deviation and tolerances. So these glass-filled nylon handles are jet fusion printed, I believe is the technology. And there are some variations in tolerances. So in order to prevent this top hole and this bottom hole from misaligning, I opted to cut an oval in the bottom of the liners to accommodate for any differentiation in height between these 2 points. So just a neat little feature there that allows the Tux CM to be possible consistently. So just know that that's there for that reason. It doesn't affect anything else. So I just wanted to point that out. The way that you remove the liners from the shell is I'm going to take out my pivot. And you're going to pivot the liners. You'll see these little cutouts here on the back side of the channel. And you want to pivot them out and away like this. So you'll notice the Zen pins, sometimes they have a little bit of end material, And those cutaways act as a guide as well as clearance for those pins. So you would take your two liners, put the pin in place, and then find the slot there, and then seat it into the channel shell. And I think I've pointed out everything that I needed to. So I'm just going to go ahead and reassemble this. There we go. And you always want to start with the top portion of the build. You don't want to set the bolt here at the bottom until you've assembled the top first. So you would actually go ahead and put the blade on and screw that down and do all of that before you put in the bottom sex bolt and the hot swappable spacer. So I'm going to do that off camera for the sake of time. So you can see I put the handle back onto my build, and you notice that I installed the blade first. And if we go down to the bottom of the handle, we do not have, come on, focus. We do not have that bottom bolt or that spacer. So that is how you want to assemble it. Because this point up here, this hole, and the holes that are going through the channel shell, as well as the liners, and the pivot hole in the blade, and the washers, they all need to align perfectly. So this is the most important in terms of tolerances. So you want to make sure that you assemble this first, so if there is any deviation in the channel shell here, it's not going to affect the tolerances or anything. Because you'll notice here, when those liners sit, now there's a perfect clearance way for that sex bolt to sit through. And then you push it all the way. And then now you can go ahead and reinstall your screws. So get the top one. Almost forgot the spacer, so quick refresh. Insert, take your Torx driver, push it forward, and then pivot it around the sex bolt, and make sure it's sitting all the way down. That spacer is now in place. And then you take your last screw. If I could get it to catch, there we go. And then finish the job. And now you're back to a fully assembled piece. Probably have to tighten the top screw down a little bit more, but you get the idea. So now you have your Tux CM fully assembled. And now you know how to assemble it and disassemble it. So there you go. Another quick note I almost forgot to mention, when you're tuning the no Loctite pivots, as you tighten the screw, you're going to want to tighten it a little bit and then check the swing. And if it starts to bind to where it's too tight, first take the blade and the handle and then wiggle it this way so that it creates more space between this fork here. And then if you go to swing again and it's still binding, that means you need to back out that screw and then repeat that process until you get a nice smooth swing, but with as little movement between the blade and the handle as possible. And then once you have that, you're then going to set your grub screw and then go back to the main screw, tighten that down as much as you can, and then check the swing again. If it binds, then you back out the main screw, come back here, back the grub screw out a little bit, and then screw it back in a little bit further, and then reseat the main screw until you get little movement, smooth swing, and that's that. So I almost forgot to mention that that's kind of like my procedure for tuning the no Loctite pivots, and I felt that was necessary to share. And I think that's all of the relevant information about the Tux CM. Hopefully this was informative and it helped you. If you happen to purchase a Tux from me, you now know how to properly maintain it and what to be aware of. Or if you decide to go ahead and download the Tux files and build one yourself, now you know the procedure as well. So if you want the Tux files, including the Tux CM files, those are actually getting released today, of the making of this video. Go over to my website. The links can be found over on my Instagram at Jimpy Designs. The link in my bio has all of my links. You're going to go to my website, go to the Tux project tab on my website, and you'll find the zip file that you just click the button and it downloads it. And then, have at it. Mess around with the files. I appreciate you watching. And again, I hope this helps. God bless.